Hello and welcome to week 7 in Statistics for Psychology, and we enter into our first tests. Now, we've been talking a lot about descriptive statistics, and we haven't left descriptive statistics because indeed correlations continue along the line of descriptive statistics, but they are bordering right on relationships between objects and between variables, and then when we look at regression, that is the tool that we use for predictive statistics. So you'll be learning about correlations and regressions in this particular chapter. So I would recommend, if you haven't been watching them up until now, is to watch the little video from Crash Course that I have on correlations, because that individual directly addresses the question in our discussion, and that is the incident of spurious correlations, when things seem to happen in relation to one another, but there is really no cause-effect relationship. In fact, it drives home the very notion that if there is a correlation between two variables, all you're doing is describing how they relate to each other. You are not describing a cause-effect relationship. Now, just in case you're wondering, what is a correlation? If you're looking at two things that can be measured numerically, and you find out through a correlation that either both of those numbers go up and down together, that would be a positive correlation, or when one goes up, the other one goes down. And in the course book, there's some explanation not only of positive correlations and negative correlations, but the degree to which they can be positive and negative. The correlation is expressed in a number from -1 to +1. So -1 perfect negative correlation, +1 perfect positive correlation, very rare. Spurious correlations are things that happen in nature that just happen to seem to go up and down together, or they have a negative correlation together. And the video does a really good job of looking at some of those, so make sure you spend some time in that video. For our quiz, simply a bunch of multiple choice, true and false questions related to correlations and regressions. And finally, the Chapter 7 assignment is going to be having you do a scatter plot, which is for each of two variables. You have one along the x-axis and one along the y-axis, and the score, like say one individual has two scores, let's say grade point average and the amount of TV they watch. So the grade point average is over here, and their amount of TV they watch is over here, and it kind of comes up, and that's their data point, has two values to it. And when you do that a bunch of times, you get all of these dots, and you create that in a graph within Excel, and then you use that to calculate the correlation, the relationship of those. You'll see how that kind of scatter plot looks a lot like the examples of different types of relationships that I have in the course book. You're then going to go into Excel and you select any one of those dots and right-click it, and you'll be able to insert what's called a trend line, which is Excel's name for a regression line. And then what it provides you with, you have a dotted line that's going to be like the best representation of all those dots on a single line, and you're going to be able to insert an equation to tell you if you know x, you can predict y. If you know y, you can predict x. That equation, if you remember from geometry, is the slope of that line. Now that line is used in the progress of regression when we have a relationship that we can describe with a scatter plot. We then take all those spots away, and we have that one line. Then we use that graph, we use that equation. If we know one score, we can predict the other. This is how almost every single entrance exam for college and graduate school works. There is a relationship between how people score on that test and how they will score in the future in college. And so they take your score on the test, and where does it go on that line? And they go down and they say, is that good enough to get in school? Yes or no? And that's often when they draw the line. So these are very often used tools within psychology, and this and everywhere in business, in finance, in weather, all of these, everything. When we know one factor, how can we predict another? And that's using that regression line. Then we have the scatter plot, and then you have a descriptive statistic called the correlation, which is a number between -1 and +1 that represents the degree of positive and negative correlation that's going on. So that's the discussion, the quiz, and the assignment. Have a great week with this. Very fun stuff. And be well, and I will see you next time.